Okay, let's look at the reciprocal method now. Now this one is a little more complex than the first two that we have just taken a look at. We saw the direct method, it was simple. The step-down method was fairly simple, but this one is complex. It, however, is, of course, theoretically the most precise. Alright, so basically what we're going to be doing is it's an iteration or repetition of a process. It can be difficult to implement. The more support departments, think of that. Right now we're only looking at an example with 2 support departments. What if we had 5? What if we had 10? This could really get hairy. Alright, so the more support departments, the higher the level of difficulty. However, we're lucky in this day and age because with the increased use of technology and greater accounting information systems abilities, we can erase or decrease some of this difficulty. Okay, so we've got the reciprocal method, and it is set up so that we can fully recognize the mutual services provided among all support departments. So those reciprocal relationships and the underlying cost are therefore going to be showing up better when we use this method. These allocations can be performed by using repeated iterations of allocations or by formulating and solving linear equations which express the relationships among the departments. Alright, so again we're allocating the support department cost to not only the other operating departments out there, but we are also going to allocate support department costs to other support departments. Okay, so this method fully incorporates all those interdepartmental relationships. It is also commonly called the matrix method. Alright, so here's our data set yet again. Paying attention here, we're talking about the fact that we've got engineering and production control has $300,000 worth of overhead costs they want to allocate. And then materials management has $264,000 they want to allocate. But we're paying very special attention now to the fact that engineering and production control, 30% of their amount is going to be going to materials management based on the fact that that engineering salary of the engineering support in materials management is 30% of that $120,000 total. And then materials management, 10% of their amount is going to be allocated to engineering and production control based on the fact that 400 hours or material handling labor hours is used by the engineering and production control of materials management's time. And again, that 400 is 10% of the total labor hours available from materials management, which is 4,000. Now here's where you guys have got to understand this. We are going to take and we are going to apply 30% from materials management into engineering and production control, and we are going to take 10% of materials management and put that in. What you're going to see is we've kind of got a circle effect. Once we've done it once, aren't we putting a dollar amount back into somewhere where we've just got through allocating it out to zero? Alright, so that causes us an issue. So in other words, we've got to keep dipping back in and allocating it once again until it's all been allocated away. Okay, so this can be very time consuming. Alright, here's basically what this looks like, okay? First allocation of materials management or actually pull up here to the engineering and production control. The engineering and production and control, recall that it's 30% goes to materials management, 50% goes to the machining department, and the remaining 20% goes to assembly. Right, so we're still starting with the one with the largest percentage. So because materials management gets 30% of the engineering and production control, we have started with engineering and production control. Right, so we have allocated out all $300,000 based on those percentages, those original percentages that we saw early on in the lecture videos. Alright, so materials management gets $90,000. That, of course, is going to get added to their original $264,000. So now they've got $354,000 that needs to be allocated out. That $354,000 is going to get allocated based on materials management, material labor hours. The original labor hours, where 1/10 or 10% goes back to engineering and production control. That as of the first step has a balance of 0 after that first step allocated out all 300. So we're putting back in $35,400. That means we're going to have to allocate that $35,400 out again. Okay? So the $354,000, again, 10% is going to engineering, production, and control. 2/10 of that, or 20%, goes on to the machining department, and then 7/10 of it goes to the assembly department. Alright, so now there's $35,400 sitting in engineering, production, control. We now need to divvy it out based again on those original percentages. 3/10 of the $35,400 goes to materials management. 50% or 5/10 goes to machining department. And then the remaining 20% goes to the assembly department. Well, look what happened when we did the 3/10 to materials management. This $354,000 allocation on step 2 made materials management go to 0, but based on what we just did, there is now $10,620 back in materials management. So now we're going to have to take and do another step and allocate that out again based on those original percentages. So $10,620, where 10% of that goes to engineering, production, and control. $1,062, so much to machining, so much to assembly. Alright, so we had gotten engineering, production, and control down to 0, but now, lo and behold, we just put in another $1,062. So now we've got to do it again. Go back to the original percentages. 10% goes to materials management. 20% goes on, etc., etc. And this just continues and continues and continues until, look, we get it down to $1 and then finally allocate that out, getting everything down to 0 in these two support departments. And then the machining department and the assembly department finally hold all of the costs, their amounts plus the allocations based on the reciprocal method to give us these final numbers. This can be done in a formula-based application, doing the linear equations. I'm going to show you next how to just do it by hand, but you could also use Excel to perform it. How can we do the reciprocal method? By formulating and solving linear equations. We've got 3 steps. The first one, we express the support department cost and the reciprocal relationships in the form of linear equations. We just saw the data. One is 30% of another, and the other one is 10%. Alright, we're going to solve the set of linear equations algebraically in order to obtain the complete reciprocated cost of each support department. And then finally, we're going to allocate those out. We're going to allocate the complete reciprocated cost of each one of those support departments on to all the other departments based on those original amounts of usage. Alright, so again, here is our data set. Materials management receives 30% of engineering, production, and control. Materials management, 10% of it goes to engineering, production, and control. So again, 30% of engineering, production, and control is for materials management department, and 10% of materials management is for engineering and production control. So we need those two numbers so that we can plug them into our formulas. Alright, so if we express it into equations, materials management has a base overhead budgeted cost of $264,000, but we also know that they are going to get 30% of engineering production controls amount. Okay, so there's the first formula. So materials management equals $264,000 plus 30% of EPC. EPC's formula, they've got $300,000 worth of overhead cost plus 10% of materials management. But again, recall, these are all interrelated. Where do we draw the line? We have got to make sure it is fully reciprocated and the amounts show correctly. Alright, so using these equations we can solve. Using algebra, starting with materials management, let's plug in, here's the EPC, let's plug in the formula from EPC into this area. Alright, so 264,000 plus 0.3 times EPC. And EPC is 300,000 plus 0.1 of materials management. Alright, using algebra we can continue to solve. Materials management equals 264,000 plus 90,000. That's the 0.3 times 300,000. And then 0.3 times 0.1 mm means 0.03 mm. We can then add the 264 and the 90 together, and then subtract this 0.03 mm from this side to get it over here. Now, you guys don't see it, but there should actually be a 1 here for 1 mm, right? You guys remember how algebra works? Therefore, once we subtract the 0.03 from both sides, we get 0.97 mm equals to 354,000. We now need to get rid of this 0.97 on this side so that we have only mm remaining. So 0.97 mm divided by 0.97 equals 354,000 divided by 0.97, which gives us a final result. MM equals 364,949. We're going to use this number later to allocate this amount out based on the original percentages. Okay, so remember this number. We're going to come back to it. We're going to use what we solved MM for in our next part, because recall we do still have this EPC, so we need to calculate what the final result is going to be for EPC. Alright, so EPC equals 300,000 plus 0.1 of MM based on our information. Let's plug in the formula or the number that we just solved for MM. So 300,000 plus 0.1 of 364,949 that we just came up with. Therefore, EPC equals 300,000 plus 36,495, which means EPC equals 336,495. And then we have to allocate this further out. Okay, so we've got the numbers for EPC, we've got the numbers for MM. Again, EPC is engineering, production, and control, and the other one is materials management. We know we had original percentages, so let's take those and use them. Once we do this allocation, it's going to result in more being allocated out of these two than what was originally budgeted. And when we do that, mathematically, it ensures that all the interrelationships among the service support departments have in fact been received and further allocated. Alright, so here's the step 3. Alright, so we've got 364,949 that we're going to allocate out of materials management based on the original percentages. 1/10 of it goes to EPC. So we're going to put 36,495 into EPC. 2/10 is going to go over to machining, and 7/10 is going to go over to assembly. Again, those were the original 10, 20, and 70%. Therefore, 364,949 is allocated out of MM when originally budgeted was only 264. And then we've got to allocate from EPC. EPC, recall we just solved, was 336,495. We're going to take that and we're going to allocate it out based on those percentages original. 30% goes to materials management, that's 100,949. 50% goes to machining, 168,247. And then that last 20% goes to assembly, 67,299. Those three amounts equal to the 336,495. 336,495 is going out of EPC when only original 300,000 was budgeted. Alright, so here's what that looks like. Alright, 300,000 minus the 336,495 based on how we solved for it and then allocated those numbers out to these other areas. And here is the materials management. They receive so much of that, plus machining, plus assembly. And then the allocation of the 364,949 out of materials management. Put 36,495 back into engineering. Alright, but notice we had extra coming out. So that's how this works to make this go to 0. Alright, and when we took out the 364,949 being allocated to machining and assembly, that number takes out that extra 100,949 that came in from engineering. Alright, so 264 plus the 100,949 from engineering did in fact get taken out of materials management. Alright, so it's just an odd way of looking at it. You might need to pause it and take a look, think about it for a minute. But it does make it result to a 0 balance in engineering, production, control and materials management, and now machining and assembly hold everything. You could also take a look at this chart if you would like to look at that and think about it a little bit more. Again, the reciprocal is definitely more of a challenge. Based on these three, we have seen that the direct and the step-down methods both have the advantage of being simple. The reciprocal method is theoretically the most precise, but it is difficult to implement, especially if you have a large number of support departments. However, this difficulty is being lessened by the use of computers. In determining which method to utilize, the company should consider the amounts of differences obtained under each of the approaches. Okay, so go and look and see if there's a big difference between step down, reciprocal, and that original easy one, the direct method. If there is not much of a difference in what is finally making its way to the machining department and the assembly department, then there is no point in going through the step down method or the reciprocal method if the direct method gives us a close enough result. Alright, so think of that cost benefit analysis. Which one gives us the best benefit for the lowest cost?